Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Salebox for the 1st of December 2014. My name is TotalBiscuit, rounding up today's Steam deals. Now, as far as I know, these are also going to be going on for 48 hours, but Steam has sort of changed its mind in the process of recording this video, so who the hell knows at this point? Hopefully, they will stick around. We'll see if that ends up being the case. If not, well, expect them to disappear on December the 2nd, so you better be quick with picking this stuff up. So let's begin, shall we? With The Forest, 33% off. It is an early access game. It's first-person, open-world survival horror. I'm sure you've heard that one before. The Forest, as it turns out, is looking like it's going to be very, very good once it's done. It has overwhelmingly positive reviews and great previews on many websites that I do actually trust. It is looking really quite fantastic. But it's an early access game. The thing about all of these early access sales is it's very rare to actually see a big discount, except in the case of something like, say, Prison Architect. 33% off a game that's only $15 to begin with isn't really a deal that, in my opinion, is worth jumping at when you have to deal with the fact that it's early access. They've added co-op multiplayer into the game, and they are continuing to update it regularly. The community seems to absolutely love it, but it's an early access. So, there you go. Ryse Son of Rome, 35% off. I can safely recommend that you do not pick this up. Ryse Son of Rome is very pretty. It's a brilliant benchmarking tool for your system. And it's dull as dishwater. It is one of the most boring spectacle fighters I've ever played. Indeed, it's all about the spectacle, and there's very little actual fighting involved in it. The fighting system doesn't evolve throughout the entire game. That's what really gets me. It's like they forgot all the lessons taught to them by much, much better games in this genre. When you do the whole character action spectacle fighter thing, your fighter is supposed to evolve over time and gain new movesets, and you gradually master an ever-evolving library of weapons and moves. In Ryse Son of Rome, you don't do any of that. It's actually ridiculous. The game is astonishingly linear, and yes, it's ridiculously pretty, but it's a showpiece and nothing more than that. Just remember, this was an Xbox One launch title, and launch titles, well, they are not known for perhaps being the most inspired, and this was nothing more than a graphical showpiece. On PC, it is not relevant, and frankly, the wave-based multiplayer is not exactly compelling either. Wasteland 2, 33% off. Not a huge discount. So what I've played of Wasteland 2, which is about 10 hours, which is barely scratching the surface of this game, frankly, is pretty positive. Bear in mind, I did back this game for $1,000. It was a Kickstarter title. I have my own NPC in the game. Now, I don't really know what that makes me. Invested in its success, even though, of course, there's no actual investment reward for that, or extra critical of something that I threw a lot of money at because I believed in it. I don't really know either way, but my experience with it up to this point is that it delivered exactly what it promised, that being an old-school Fallout-style RPG with all the trimmings and all the trappings. It looks a little bit old, there's no doubt about that. The graphical assets are certainly not the strong point, but it's got great dialogue, it's got interesting choices, it's got interesting loot, it has permanent death, and I enjoy the combat system. It's very much XCOM and Fallout-esque. If you are looking for a more classic experience along the lines of Fallout 1, 2, and Tactics, then Wasteland 2 is most likely going to be right up your alley, and it's well reviewed for a very good reason. Tomb Raider, 80% off. Complete bargain for a fantastic game as far as I'm concerned. This has been discounted pretty heavily. Square Enix does like to do that, and it's going to bump up their sales figures. Maybe they can stop complaining now, but this is an absolute bargain for an awesome game. Wouldn't worry too much about the Game of the Year edition, because frankly, none of that DLC is worth having. It's all stuff that affects the multiplayer or is a bunch of skins. Waste of your time. You don't need it. The multiplayer is pretty much dead at this point. Nobody really plays it, but the single player is well worth your time. It doesn't do anything spectacularly well, especially when you compare it to something like the Far Cry series, but it does everything pretty damn well. It's a very much an Uncharted-like experience, except you're playing with Lara Croft as opposed to Nathan Drake. Solid combat, solid writing, excellent graphics, nice world design, and a lack of emphasis on puzzle solving and actual tomb raiding, which to me is good. For those who enjoyed the original Tomb Raider games, is probably a complete travesty. Great PC port as well, by the way. Absolutely fantastic PC port. XCOM Enemy Unknown, 75% off. You can also pick up its expansion, Enemy Within, for not quite as cheap. There's also a complete pack, which will save you a little bit of money over buying the two separately. There's also an Enemy Unknown plus the Bureau pack, which is actually only $1 more. The Bureau for $1 is actually worth it, as far as I'm concerned. Not an amazing game, but it has some interesting ideas, and it's worth playing for $1, certainly. So XCOM Enemy Unknown has been a giant time sink for me, no doubt, and the expansion Enemy Within added a lot of, as far as I'm concerned, much needed depth to it. Still doesn't quite add the stuff that I would have liked to see as someone that enjoyed the original XCOM games, but standing on its own, XCOM and XCOM Enemy Within are really enjoyable tactics games that require a certain degree of tolerance for RNG and frustration. Permadeath is a thing, you can screw yourself over to the point of having to restart, and of course there are mods that make this even more detailed and even more difficult. The Long War is something I'd very well recommend, although perhaps not for your first few playthroughs. XCOM is great, and frustrating in equal measure. Crusader Kings 2, 75% off. This is the game that I've been meaning to play. It's been on my list for, well, ever since it came out, really, and I just haven't got around to it. Universal acclaim across the board for this one. Lots of really interesting expansions that have been put in with this. In fact, like, the DLC package is ridiculous. It's got so much stuff. There's like 48 pieces of DLC for this. Most of them are just pointless portraits and little skins, but there are expansion packs that are very much worth having, including a very recent one, Charlemagne. This is a very in-depth grand strategy, and one that's enjoyed by many people. I am looking forward to eventually getting around to actually playing it. This might be something that I do over the Christmas period where there are perhaps no new games to play. If you want to know what this game's all about, go watch Northern Lion and Quill 18 play it. Apparently, neither of them are very good at it, so I've been told, but that doesn't really matter to me. It's entertaining to watch them flop about nonetheless. Skyrim, 75% off, which actually takes it down to $5 in the US, which is ludicrously low. Most of my complaints in this game could frankly be fixed by extensive modding, so my dislike for Skyrim has always come down to the same thing. It's a giant lake with the depth of a paddling pool. It's this absolutely gorgeous world that changes not one damn bit based on what you did, which again is all very unfortunate. The Legendary Edition comes with the DLC. Both Dragonborn and Dawnguard are very good. Hearthfire is kind of pointless, but it's also, of course, a little bit cheap. And needless to say, Skyrim is still kind of buggy to this very day, because it's a Bethesda game and that's sort of what they do. To be frank, it's worth $5 just to get lost in the world for 10 hours, and then maybe you kind of realize that there's not actually that much going on in it, but you still got your money's worth anyway, so even if I don't really like Skyrim all that much, it's still ludicrously hard not to recommend it at that price, so come on. Child of Light, 60% off. I originally planned to actually get a video out on this, and well, after many hours of actually playing the press build, it deleted my save files, so it never happened, but I'll give you my short opinion on it. It's creative, and yet it's not really all that compelling. The thing which really bothered me about that game was the dialogue. This is going to be a take it or leave it thing, but they decided to do the whole thing in rhymes. It seems reasonably obvious that Child of Light was designed to be played by children, and that's not a bad thing. It's not like children deserve bad games. Come on, you know, we played some absolute classics when we were younger, but it does definitely seem like it was a game that was aimed perhaps at a younger audience, or maybe for a parent and child to play in the sort of pseudo-couch co-op mode that they've got going on. Outside of that, it's a fairly basic JRPG with a JRPG-like combat system and a limited amount of customization. It has some depth to it, but it's certainly not the most complex system I've ever seen. It works relatively well, and outside of that, it's a lot of exploration of the world and doing side quests and finding hidden collectibles. I wasn't really all that impressed by it. I'm happy that it did well, that apparently it made back its budget, and that makes me hopeful that Ubisoft will actually invest in more small projects like this rather than just making the same damn games every year. But personally, Child of Light was not to my taste. And that brings us on to the deal of the day. There's a lot of really good deals today on the daily deals, so I'd strongly suggest you go and dig through them. There's lots of really good games there. But the one that I would point to as being the standout has got to be Castle Crashers, 90% off, cheap as chips. I love Castle Crashers. I really do. I think it was actually the first Xbox Live game that I bought on my 360. and it's awesome. I played it, my wife played it, my son played it. The game's hilarious, it's colorful, it's very enjoyable, and I suppose that it really helps that when I was younger, one of my favorite games that I got to play over at my neighbor's house was Golden Axe, and Castle Crashers reminds me quite a lot of that. If I have one complaint, it's that the characters' movesets are perhaps not particularly well fleshed out, so it can get somewhat repetitive. The game's designed to be played through multiple times with the various unlockable characters, and you can get a bunch of different weapons, but they're mostly just stats upgrades. They don't really give you different movesets, and it's better played in co-op because it has some interesting competitive co-op elements there from time to time. But excellent level design, great sense of humor, and a colorful, enjoyable romp, and a brilliant soundtrack. Certainly make this worthwhile. Alright folks, that wraps me up for the day. Thank you very much for watching the sale box. Tomorrow I'll be doing hidden deals. That's supposed to be the last 24 hours of the sale, assuming that Valve doesn't change things around. I'm looking at the front page right now. It says that the featured deals are available for 2 days. Let's hope that that's actually true and they don't just pull the sale down on December the 2nd, which they have been known to do. I'll see you next time.